This is Transqat. What is Transqat? Transqat is a safe space. It's a place for respectful conversations about transgender issues. It's a place for queer people to come tell their stories. I'm host Clare McCarthy. Welcome to Transqat. In Season 1, I had the pleasure of recording an episode with Celeste Lacine. That's episode 25 in your feed. Celeste is the co-founder of the Trevor Project and also a group called the Future Perfect Project. And the FPP is dedicated to amplifying voices of queer youth. A few months later, Celeste reached out to let me know that the Future Perfect Project had produced a new podcast called I'm Feeling Queer Today. It's available wherever you found Transqat, and I can't recommend this show strongly enough. Celeste helped me arrange a virtual sit-down with three of the creators of the show, Lily, Eric, and Zorian. In today's episode, I talk with them for a while and then turn the show over to them so they can show you Transqat listeners how they do their thing. Please enjoy. I have now caught up with all 6 episodes. I have listened to them straight through, binged like a good audience member, and I love this podcast. Let me just start with the two of you. Introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Feel free, Lily.
Okay, I'll try my best. I'm Lily. I worked on the pilot for the podcast and then again on this season, and then might have summer plans involved in this podcast. We might have to expunge that from the record.
Spoiler alert!
I have been with the organization since probably June of 2020, so they can't wait to get rid of me. I'm from Massachusetts, and I currently attend college in Massachusetts, getting a very silly double degree in English and film media and theater, which is interesting because this organization encouraged me to pursue education in those areas. So if not for them, who knows what I might be doing. So I feel very grateful for that.
Whereabouts in Massachusetts? Because I grew up in West Springfield and then lived for about a decade in Agawam. So whereabouts are you from there?
The closest city is Worcester. I have a really poor sense of direction. And then I go to school near Northampton, which makes me laugh because that is the lesbian capital of America.
Absolutely.
Yes. Rich history there.
Lily, let me ask, I'm looking at, we're talking over Zoom, and you have your pronouns listed there, and you have they or she or he. Does that mean you prefer different things in different circumstances, or?
Yeah, so I find for me, I have like a pretty neutral or a fluid sense of my gender, so I don't actually have a preference. I don't really care what people call me. I think one part of that is, which don't let the Republicans know this, but that I was involved in theater from a pretty young age. So I'm like, you can call me what you need to call me. So
theater is a gateway drug. You have to be so careful about that.
I don't really have a preference. So I pop it in there. People call me what they want to call me. I go with the flow. That's my personal preference. But I know that a lot of people have like one that they prefer. So that is just for me.
Eric, over to you.
Well, my name's Eric. I live in La Crescenta, California, a little bit north of LA. Currently, I'm a high school student, although we are graduating this year, as long as it's been. I've been part of Future Perfect Project for about a year. I got started with them in like March of 2023, I want to say. And I started with like writing workshops and everything. And now that has evolved into this podcast. I think it's a really great way to like express queer joy, but also kind of look at and examine all of the problems that we as like queer youth experience in America and the world. But I think it's a really great opportunity to describe myself. I would definitely call myself like a speaker, a writer, an advocate. Although, unlike Lily, I did not fall victim to theater. I am involved in Theater's Neighbor, speech and debate.
And you are taking time away from a competition today to give us a little bit of time on this podcast. How's it going so far today?
It's going really well. It's busy, but I enjoy both of these things. They're both outlets of like expression and advocacy and creativity and everything. So I think it fits really well together.
And Zorian Edwards, welcome.
Hi, I'm Zorian Edwards. My pronouns are he, they. I am transgender, female to male, and I am bisexual. I was heavily involved with a Pride Alliance at my high school a couple years back. Sadly, we have disbanded since, but my advisor there is who got me involved with the Future Perfect Project. She just shared a link and was like, hey, this seems cool. So from there, I put my hat in the ring for this podcast, and then I ended up here.
What state are you in? Zorian?
Oh,
What high school?
sorry. I'm from Sagertown, Pennsylvania, which is
Oh, wow.
about an hour away from Erie.
When your GSA dissolved, was that because of pressure or just
Mm.
kind of faded out in terms of number of kids being a part of it?
It's a little bit of a long story, but I live in a very rural area that's majorly Republican. My school board basically called all LGBT students evil, and then that led to book bans and protests, and the GSA was obviously targeted during that entire situation. I think 2 years after that started, I became president, which was last year, and eventually our advisor was run out of the school district because of journalism issues. She was the journalism advisor, which I'm also a part of, but she was ran out of the school district because she was being such an advocate for us to the point where they decided she should not be there any longer. And once the advisor left, no one wanted to take over because everyone was scared that same thing would happen to them. And all the kids decided that it was time to disband.
Very sorry to hear that. All three of you have mentioned, and of course, well, maybe we should start with the name of the podcast. We keep referring to this podcast. So I will count you down, and then I want the three of you unmute yourselves and tell me the name of your podcast. Ready?
I'm
I'm
feeling
feeling
queer
queer
today.
Perfect. Could not have
Don't
been
ask
better.
us to sing either.
No singing. This is a no singing podcast. So I Feel Queer Today is the name of the podcast. Lily, you alluded to the fact that there might be a season 2 in the works. Maybe?
Currently, we are scheduled for a season 2 coming out in September, and perhaps some bonus content in the interim, because as I'm sure you know, as someone that runs a podcast, a whole lot of it ends up on the cutting room floor. So yes, season 2 should be on its way in September, and season 3, I believe, is already in the works. So
Wow.
they're on top of things here at the Future Perfect Project. Yes.
And that's where I wanted to go next, because again, all three of you have mentioned the Future Perfect Project as being behind this creative endeavor. I did have Celeste on the show last season, and we talked a little bit about it. But tell me about you as individuals, what this project does for you, what it means for you.
The Future Perfect Project, at its core, is very much about uplifting queer voices, uplifting queer expression, and really just working towards allowing for that outlet of our struggles, of our ideas, of our perspectives, and really just kind of everything that we often don't necessarily have the chance to express. And I think it is a really great way to kind of connect people across the country. I mean, just from our introductions, like me, Zorian, and Lily live all over the place. But I think that like getting to meet so many different people definitely allows to expand those perspectives. So like it's a lot about coming together and expressing what we believe, but it also kind of absorbing all of those other things. I know for me personally, like it started out just with like writing workshops. Celeste and a couple other Future Perfect Project like organizers came to like my school district, and we did like a little writing showcase and everything. And that has evolved to this. But I think it's definitely like it's a platform to allow for a safe way to share all the things that we have, the problems we have in the world, the joy we have in the world, everything like that.
And the show, over the course of the 6 episodes in season 1, it really does a great job of that balance. There's a lot of joy, there's a lot of fun. I really love the segments where you would get two of you together to discuss something. I think bouncing the ideas off one another worked really well. But there was a lot of tough subjects in there. There were a lot of things that I came away really moved by. So we'll get to some of that. For the other two of you, what about your connection to the Future Perfect Project? What brought you to it?
What really drew me to it was the fact that they were looking for younger individuals. I know that sounds a little weird, but when you're younger and you're queer, a lot of people are still figuring things out, still discovering new identities, still learning about the community as a whole. And that's what really drew me to it, because I always wanted to learn more, figure out what's going on, meet new people, hear different perspectives. And I feel that this podcast really encapsulates the wide variety that is learning about the LGBT community. Like, if you listen to the podcast, no perspective is the same. And it's just beautiful. and it's poetic even.
It is, but there are segments that serve as historical primers. So when you bring up a subject that the audience might not be familiar with, you take 3-5 minutes to run down what Stonewall was, like I say, you've got fun segments like My First Queer Crush, which I think worked well every time. Lily, what brought you to the show?
Long story short, June of 2020, obviously pandemic began, and I believe that's also when they began their virtual programming, which is the only programming that I've ever been a part of. I've known these people for 4 years, and I will meet them maybe for the first time this summer in person. So who knows? Celeste could be 10 feet tall, and I have no idea. And I think when I've run events for them and when I talk to people about this organization, what I like to stress is that it makes this kind of education accessible for people that would have otherwise never had access. Whether that's for like a disability related reason, if that's financial, arts education is so expensive. If that's isolation, I live in an area where a group like this doesn't exist, especially not for young people. So to get, for me now, almost 4 years of comprehensive education in performance and creative writing, surrounded by affirming people, is something that I could have never dreamed of. And I do think it saved my life. It transformed the course of my life. I can't say enough good things about these people. And I also think that everybody does, but I have an especially acute need to see myself. And I had not met queer adults. I had not met artistic adults. So to be constantly connected with these people living lives that I could see myself living for the first time was completely transformative, because before that I was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to be happy? Probably not, because all I see is these people living tragic, painful lives. So that was transformative. But I think if you talk to Celeste, Ryan, who were the founders, and then the rest of the team, their main thing is that they want the voices of young queer people to be heard, which I think was important when they founded it, but continually is still important now, because we constantly see in like the news media and everywhere the demonizing of young queer people, especially the idea that these people are children who can't possibly know about themselves. But in reality, we know ourselves and we deserve to tell our stories and to be seen for who we are in our fullness, no matter where we are in our journeys, because things do change over time. That's life. Not everybody works the same job forever. Not everybody is 4 years old forever. We accept change in every other facet of life, but not in this. So to be in a space that celebrates and uplifts the stories and the truths of young queer people, their identities, their realities, is truly, it's indispensable. Again, I'm talking so long, but I have
No.
so many nice things to say about these people.
And is this an ongoing, will there be new generations of FPP kids coming into this? You said there might be a season 2 and a season 3. Will new voices be coming in as you go along?
From what I know right now, I am just a contributor. I'm not deeply involved. From what I know, season 2 is the other half of the material that was produced by our first group. So it's more of the same crowd. And then season 3, hopefully, should it go into production, is going to be a new group of people and sort of a new theme. So that's exciting. And then the good thing about our workshops is that there's constant turnover. I have just graduated out of their standard program because I'm now 20. So from 12 to 19, we always have new people coming in and you see their new little faces and it's so wonderful.
Let me pull something out of what Lily said there and toss it to the other two. This really a staple of the attacks on queer youth is that you are too young to know what the hell you're talking about. That it's a phase. It's, you're being influenced by the media. People like me are apparently recruiting you. Speak to that.
I think when it comes to the idea of assuming that youth of any age are too young to understand who they are and what they need and what they want and the course of their life, in the sense that we don't know what's going to happen, they're right. But also at the same time, like, I don't think that the people who are such critics of queer people and especially queer youth, I don't think they grasp the complexity and the nuance that really everyone is capable of. And I think that kind of understanding the fact that when it comes to having representation, when it comes to having platforms like this, it's not like exposing someone to an idea and somehow altering their brain. It's just allowing them to have the vocabulary to understand who they are and to express that. Like, I know for me personally, prior to FPP, I was very much aware of the fact that it's like, okay, I'm not cis, I'm not straight, but I didn't really know how to formulate that into like words and ideas. But I think through largely the Future Perfect project, I've kind of come to understand how I, as like a non-binary person, like why that is. And while I could spend forever talking about that, I think it comes down to the fact that the Future Perfect project, through like the pure love and the pure support and encouragement that exists within all of their spaces, allows for the ability not just to have the vocabulary to express who you are, but to understand the perspectives of other people, to kind of create your own identity. Because I know that for me personally, it's very much like I know who I am, but how to portray that to the outside world sometimes seems super impossible. And I think this is to the point of what Lily was saying about like kind of having the ability to learn and to be educated. It's not just the formal idea of education about writing, performance, and art, but also just education about like how to explore yourself and kind of understand that whole journey. Because I think without things like the Future Perfect project, that gets really tough because you don't necessarily have the support, but you don't have just quite literally like the vocabulary and the ability to express yourself. So I think that when it comes to the idea of understanding queer youth, things like this just give that ability.
Well, regardless of what career path you end up going down, collaboration is an essential workplace skill. And I don't care if you're working in a cubicle sort of office or you're working in musical theater or whatever it is, you need to be able to function within a group where you're listening and being honest in return and creating a safe space, regardless of your gender identity or your sexual preference. So what you're learning seems to me to be imminently applicable. Zorian, you're doing it in an environment where they're trying to take the resources away from you, where instead of knowing that you can walk into the public library and find a book that would help you gain the vocabulary that Eric was talking about, there's a good chance that might have already been culled off the shelf. So again, how do you respond to that notion that you're not ready to be talking about these subjects?
So by the time that they finally like started pulling books off shelves was about the time where I had already kind of formulated what I was and knew about a lot of the things they were pulling off the shelves already.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily this didn't affect me as a person a whole lot. My main concern when this happened was about the younger folks in the Pride Alliance and throughout the elementary school that would come up and like go into the high school and realize that these stories aren't there or not realize they're there. I've been told a lot throughout my life that I was too young to realize what was going on, to understand things, and to even have the knowledge to fight back against that. To that, I have to say that young people are powerful. I'm going to say we in this instance. I'm 18 right now. But when we start to discover ourselves, we should not be shunned from that. We should be allowed to grow in our education. We should be allowed to ask hard questions and just simple things. I know from a young age that like my grandfather is highly like very political and I didn't understand politics at all. So me asking him about politics and some bills that were being passed that didn't quite sit right with me, I was immediately shut down because my opinion didn't matter. I wasn't 18. And that's what he told me. I know a lot of young people have to deal with that as well. Like, hey, mom, I think I might be trans. You don't know what trans is. You don't know what that means. And the thing is, kids should be allowed to learn about those experiences, just as they should be able to learn about different cultures, people different from them, and people the same from them. When you look at a library, there are so many different things that you can go out and read, and you have that choice, whether or not to pick up the book off the shelf, whether or not you actually read it or just set it on a shelf somewhere. And having the freedom to do that is a huge part of education. It's a huge part of formulating who you are as a person. It's a whole lot of discovering different things. And the fact that other people are actively either censoring, taking away, or shunning that from younger people prohibits them from learning those things young. So like if a kid goes through high school, elementary school, not knowing gay people exist, not knowing that's even a thing, and then going out in the world and has a boss that's gay, it's like, wait, what does that mean? Is that something that's going to infect me? And that just sparks a lot of confusion and a lot of fear.
Yeah.
And anyone should have the right to learn about what they want to learn.
Amen. We are all finger snapping. I had one question for each of you based on stuff I pulled out of the shows, and then I'm turning this over to you. You guys have already proven to me with 6 episodes that you know how to run a podcast, so you're taking over after that. Eric, I'm going to start with you. Episode 5 was about mental health. I think it's titled Coping While Queer. And you and Sonia Mia really went for it. You really dove into the discussion. You brought your own experiences to the fore. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because it seemed you were able to make yourselves really vulnerable in such a way that I think anybody listening to that episode would get it.
When it comes to Coping While Queer, episode 5, I think I think all 3 of the episodes I was a part of were such like unique and life-changing experiences, because even though it was a couple minutes even of discussion, I think that, like Lily and Zorian have been saying, it's like even like those little glimpses of learning about other people's perspectives is really impactful. But I think when it comes to the mental health episode specifically, it was, compared to the other 2 episodes I did, it was a lot heavier. Obviously, because mental health is definitely not a light subject. But I think also it made me realize how big of an intersection there is for me and for, I'm sure, many, if not all, queer, trans youth, people in general, when it comes to mental health and being queer. Because obviously there are the very apparent facts that it's like, when you are queer, there are certain difficulties that will be posed to you, no matter where you live, no matter who you're surrounded by. And I think that on the surface, it seems like it kind of ends there. But I definitely think that the intersection between mental health and being queer in America is a lot deeper than that. Because I think when it comes to whether it's like legislation being passed, or I know like for Zorian, like living through that in a state in which that is happening and can happen, there's just like this underlying stress and fear when it comes to just existing as a queer person and not knowing what's going to happen and everything like that. But I also think that even when it comes to just internal struggle, obviously when it comes to mental health, that's something that I'm sure we all go through. But I think for queer people, it's amplified because it's not just exploring who you are and your place in the world, but doing that when you also have to figure out your identity, like the very basis, the core of who you are, kind of not necessarily understanding that, whether it's because the information you have is restricted or because the people around you don't allow you to explore that. I think that just adds this extra layer of challenge to kind of understanding who you are and how you navigate the world. But something I definitely discovered through my discussion with Sonia Mia is that that challenge makes us so much stronger. Like Zorian said, queer youth are powerful. And I think that when it comes to mental health, that is so much more apparent because while yes, there are so many challenges that come with being queer and trying to navigate that, I think that there's beauty in that, in the sense that not only does it allow us to work through those challenges and just understand ourselves better as a person, queer identity aside, but I think it also creates this community for us to connect and understand those experiences with each other, because there's just this inherent solidarity to having that shared experience, regardless of who you are or where you live or anything like that. Yeah. So I think exploring that was definitely eye-opening to everything mental health related.
As an older person, definitely no longer qualify as queer youth, but it lightens up my heart to know that that's something that you and I share, right? That we've struggled through those things and we work on them daily. But it also makes me incredibly sad that decades down the road, we still live in a society that is set up such that we are subject to this minority stress syndrome.
it's a point of connection, but it's also a point of sadness for me.
Obviously, it would be so wonderful to live in a world in which that didn't have to happen. But I think obviously, as we all can recognize, like the reality is that to an extent that will never go away. But I definitely think that whether it's us for having this conversation now or being part of the Future Perfect Project, or even just knowing that there are other queer people and queer youth out there who have similar experiences, I think there's something there that can only exist through that shared struggle. And I think recognizing that allows not only the ability to navigate through how difficult it can be to exist in the world that we live in, but also I think it allows for the recognition that that is what makes being queer so beautiful and so unique and so powerful.
Lily, there was a moment in the first episode when you're talking with Alex that made me so happy. And I wanted to ask you about it. The two of you talk about Alison Bechdel's Dykes to Watch Out For as a rite of passage, as something that is important to you as queer youth. And that just made me so happy because it's been, what, 30 or 40 years since she stopped doing that strip. She wrote it for a period of like 25 years. And to hear that it still is meaningful to you, I yelped when I was in the car. So tell me about Alison Bechdel's Dykes to Watch Out For.
Oh my goodness. It is definitely, it's still a staple somehow. But I will also say, interestingly, I can't give you the exact year, but at some point in the 20-teens, her graphic memoir, Fun Home, was made into a Broadway musical. So I know for a lot of people my age, our in was actually, oh, this is a beautiful piece of art. What is the source material? And then going through then. And then that was also one of the first big books to be banned that a lot of giant news outlets were doing stories about. So that, but it's still a staple. It's still talked about, especially in that Alison Bechdel did portray like gender non-conforming people in that comic strip. She portrayed real people, despite the fact that it was a comic strip. You were like, yes, these are queer people, but they're also deeply flawed, and it's kind of messy.
They
things
were
like that
fully
persist.
formed people. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, very funny to connect with, but we are still reading things like that. We're still reading Dykes to Watch Out For. We're still reading Stone Butch Blues. From the time I was like 13 years old, someone was like, you gotta read this. And I was like, I'm a child, but I will. And Beautiful, one of the best books I've ever read. So yeah, we're still connecting with these things. And I think returning to the source, one of the wonderful things that this organization does is connect us with people like older queer people. One of the first workshops I did with Celeste was them talking about a truncated history of the time that they've spent on Earth and their really wild and fascinating life.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the beauty of what you guys are doing with the Future Perfect Project is that you're making your voices heard, you're telling stories, but that becomes an historical document for future generations, right? So Allison's sitting there and, cartooning herself away for decades. And then 30, 40 years later, that becomes, you can sit down, instead of sitting down with a history book, you can sit down and watch, the March on Washington, and when her characters go there, and the advent of gay marriage, and all of these things through personal stories. And it seems that that's a really great link to what you guys are doing.
I think every generation thinks they're at a turning point because in a way they are. But I do feel like we just saw the overturn of Roe v. Wade recently, and we're seeing an increase in anti-trans bills because visibility without protection is a trap. Basically, to have sort of this documented period of, I think, Alex, who was my co-host for a lot of these episodes, who's wonderful and based near Vancouver, there was a giant anti-trans protest happening out there when we were in the middle of production, and it was one of the biggest and the first ones to happen in that part of Canada. And we have, again, like what Zorian has done. Honestly, I hope you deserve so much recognition for the work that you were doing. But like, we've captured a moment in time in the way that any piece of art does or any historical document does. And I do hope that, I don't know, it's something to look back on. It's something to catch that otherwise might have been missed. That's not the most eloquent way to put it. If anyone else here knows how to voice that better, I would love for you to do that.
Oh, it was beautiful. Zorian, in the final episode of season one, you and Frankie have this amazing conversation where you bring up, again, really heavy subjects like shame and your relationship to toxic masculinity and how you balance things like self-care and getting through a world that can be hostile to you. As with Eric's episode, it was really heartwarming to see you just put your heart right out there and say, here's what I've experienced, here's what it is. I've got to imagine that anybody listening to that would be moved.
I'll be honest, that episode, I believe within that week of it coming out, or maybe a little bit in the week before, was when we actually had that conversation. We had to like reschedule and re-push it back because Frankie and I, we couldn't line up, but we knew we wanted to have this conversation. Frankie is someone that I have looked up to since I've met them. And as like they're on testosterone now, and that's something that I've wanted to do. When I heard that they actually got to do that and they were making progress in the things that they were doing, I was like, wow, that's amazing. There's no way we could relate on anything because they're so great and so awesome. So when we finally got to sit down and have that conversation, I believe Julie was the person that was organized all this pretty much. But she just kind of sat there and let us talk. And I think that's what got the level of vulnerability and the deepness of the conversation to happen, solely because we were able to just sit there and talk to each other like we weren't even being recorded. Yeah, we both talked about a lot of very deep subjects throughout that conversation, and it was just awesome. I don't know what else to say. I think the level of like one-on-oneness is what created that.
It certainly came across that way, as this is just two people sitting and having a coffee and talking, this, as opposed to something scripted and tight. It was really insightful, and particularly, as I say, the parts about shame, because as someone who was closeted for half a century, shame is a big part of what happens to that. So I'm really grateful to you for bringing that up and for being willing to go there. All right. We're gonna insert one of those tape rewinding sounds. And now we are no longer doing Transqat. You guys are in charge. It is a mini episode of I Feel Queer Today.
Well, welcome to mini special edition of I'm Feeling Queer Today. One question that I had for you, Claire, maybe the cats too. Maybe the cats have an answer to this as well.
I'm sure they have, yeah.
But something you brought up kind of throughout, like asking us questions and like your wonderful, amazing, insightful responses, is that obviously like you have way more experience than we do existing in the world as queer people, right? I guess the question for you is, how have you seen that like your experience has evolved over time? Because I know for me personally, and I'm assuming for Lily and Zorian, it's roughly a new-ish development, like kind of having the labels that we have now, the nuances that we have, relatively speaking. So I guess, how have you seen like evolution when it comes to just ability to express yourself, but also like within your own identity?
The fact that you have a vocabulary is amazing to me. I was born in the early 60s, and through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, there was no vocabulary for this. Anything that I saw in public media that was even close to me wasn't me. I mean, I would see drag performances, whether it be comedic drag or gay stage drag. And I'd be like, that, well, that's really cool, but that's not me. That's not what I'm looking to be or do. And there just was nothing. And so the emergence of a vocabulary, which from my perspective has really only been the last 10 years or so, was remarkable. When you don't have a word for yourself, when you can't say to anybody, even within yourself, this is who I am. That does insurmountable damage. And so for me, getting the word, I mean, I am a word person. So words meant a lot to me, but it was that more than anything for me to be able to say it to myself and then say it out loud to other people changed my life. Yeah, and I'm sure you said you've talked about this with Celeste, but the notion of having been, well, a very young witness to Stonewall. I was only 6. I wasn't paying attention. And then through the AIDS crisis, through Don't Ask, Don't Tell, through DOMA, through all of these changes in society, and the fact that society has been willing to at least engage in discussion, I find that hopeful. It's not
And
easy.
like Lou said earlier, it seems we're always at a tipping point. But especially right now, I hope you know that, at least I assume I speak for all of us and many people, like we all look up to you so much. And all of the things that you've been through, all of the things you have done, your entire generation, but you, like, from what little I know of you, I'm like, you're awe-inspiring. I marvel at all the things from what I've learned just now. But I wanted to say that there is gratitude, there is respect, and there's a lot of love.
Just kind of echoing what Eric said about gratitude and all the love. I believe we all agree.
Thank you.
You talk a lot about vocabulary. So before you had what you have now, so like being able to grab from a giant like word bank to
Yeah.
like a metaphorical word bank that you can just pull a label from. Before all of that, I'm not gonna ask like what you called it, but I'm gonna ask in sort of a nuanced jumble of words. Can you give us word bank of like what you would describe you felt or what you would describe you calling yourself in some ways?
Yeah, sure, I can try. In the 70s and into the 80s, everything was gay. All of that word salad that we have now, that bank of words that we have, everything was gay then. And if you were a lesbian, you were a gay woman. And and I kept looking at that term and thinking that's not me. So I don't belong there, and I clearly don't belong in the straight world. So I guess I don't belong. And those are the sorts of words that were always in my head, that I don't belong. I don't deserve the sorts of things that other people do. Relationships, love, success. I don't get to have those. And so words like wrong were the words that I used to describe myself. There's something wrong. And there was absolutely nothing and no one in my life who would have contradicted that. There were probably people who would have said, oh, well, let me help you fix that somehow. But there would have been no one who said, let me support that. Let me love that. And that kept the closeting for a lot longer than it should have been. So yeah, wrong is the word that I use to describe myself. And that's no way to live.
I guess as a little follow-up, how obviously after having a lot of exploration of yourself and the world and everything like that, how has that changed? Like how have you kind of come to terms with your identity and how do you now label it?
Oh, Eric, coming out, being authentic, it changed everything. It changed everything. I don't have the excuse of telling myself I don't get to have those things, because if anybody ever found out who I was, they would hate me. They would leave me. I don't have that excuse anymore. I am right out on the surface, everything that I am. And so anybody who comes up to me and says, I like you, or, let's hope I love you, that actually means something now because I know they're looking at me. So it radically 180 degrees changes my life. And that not having to be hidden, so much energy went into that it was devastating and destructive, and that's all gone. So I am I am constantly working on lowering the defenses that I had to keep in place for so long. So that, going back to the mental health discussion, that's part of my ongoing journey is trying to let go of the things that I don't need anymore.
Well, Claire.
Lily, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you? I was wondering, we asked a lot of young people about their first queer crush, but has that memory stayed with you at this point in your life? And how
This
was
far
that for
down the road,
you?
has memory loss set in, is what you're asking. I do. All of my queer crushes early on were in media. They were not real people. I guess probably because it was safer in some ways. But for me, and at one point in the 70s, there was a stage production of Dracula with Frank Langella in the lead. And Langella was young and he just had this amazing, commanding performance. And when I was in high school, I worked in a movie theater and we showed the film version of Frank Langella's Dracula. And I had that movie timed to the second where I could go in to watch his speeches as he's mesmerizing people as Dracula. And in retrospect, it's so clear that that was my first queer. At the time, I just thought he was cool. And it's Dracula. Who doesn't love Dracula? But in retrospect, it was like, oh my God, yes, you were crushing on Frank Langella pretty big right there.
Of course, and that's a very classy first queer crush. It's
Yeah.
fine.
I own the DVDs so that occasionally I can go back and just like, yep, no, I wasn't wrong. That's pretty hot. Guys, thank you so much for this. Eric, I know you got to get back to your competition, so I don't want to hold you up. This has been wonderful. I can't wait for season 2. I can't wait for more beyond that. Anything you guys want to say in closing?
I mean, thank you so much for this opportunity. I mean, I know we all love podcasting with FPP, but I think like kind of expanding that net and exploring more perspectives is definitely always something that is very welcomed. But yes, so thank you so much for your perspectives, your questions, and everything that you do here on this podcast.
Kind of repeating everything that they just said. Just thank you for being so vulnerable with us. Thank you for living your truth, and thank you for being so amazing.
Again, I'm gonna repeat everything. Thank you so much for having us. It was wonderful to meet you. It was wonderful to hear a part of your story and to learn about a part of your life. And thank you for listening to the work that we've made together, because I think as creative people, sometimes you make something and you put your whole heart into it. And you're like, I hope people even give it the time of day. So thank you for...
It's a message in a bottle sometimes. You send it out and you just hope somebody who needs it is going to find it. And I found it.
Yes, so thank you firstly for sharing some of yourself with us, but thank you also for giving this organization and this little podcast a little platform.
So please seek out I'm Feeling Queer Today and give it a listen. Since we've recorded, the show has released 3 additional episodes, one of which is with Jazz Jennings herself. By the time you hear this, the Outfilm CT Festival will have ended, and once again this year I was fortunate enough to moderate a number of Q&A sessions with directors and writers and actors from some of these remarkable films. Some were in person at the screenings, but a number of the virtual conversations are available at transqat.com. Click the Outfilm link on the main page to find them. It is entirely possible that some of my cats make guest appearances during the conversations. On Thursday, June 27th, I'll be doing my Representation Matters presentation at the South Windsor Public Library. Starts at 5:30. If you're in the area, please join me. Next up is the final official episode of Season 2. It's a conversation with 2 amazing people named Amanda. Amanda Roskowski and Amanda Kate Corcoran from Women's Health CT. I saved this one for last because the 3 of us had so much fun recording it. Transqat will be on hiatus until September. I'm already lining up a lot of cool stuff for Season 3. Be sure to come on back for that. For now, this has been Transqat. I am Clare McCarthy. Thank you for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece.
And you've just been listening to Transqat. It is made by one of my favorite people in the world, Clare McCarthy.
Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC.
Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Join us on the web at transqat.com.
That's TRANSQAT.com.
QAT.com.
QAT.com.
There you'll find links to Transqat, the blog,
writing projects,
speaking engagements,
and our PayPal donations page.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monkeys.
Monies.
Your monies.
Your monies.
Not monkeys.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
On TikTok, we are at The Real Transqat.
Want to tell your story on air?
Or ask Claire a question?
What is the deal?
She has all the answers.
Or suggest a guest or topic for an upcoming episode.
Use the contact page at the website
or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com.
crmtranscat@gmail.com.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.